Welcome back, hobby friends. Today's hobby is cosplay again. And I have had some requests on how I made my Spartan armor after doing the Master Chief helmet from Infinite. And so I'm going to do kind of a different video. It won't be the exact video of me building it, but I'm going to show you how I made this bicep shoulder piece. I'm just going to kind of do it as an overview, so please leave a comment, let me know how you like it. If you like it, let me know what you think. So let's just jump right into it. So the first step of making this is cutting out the pattern, and I did this just like I did in my helmet video, so if you haven't checked that out, go ahead and check that out. But what it is using an application called Pepakura Designer, and what it does is it takes the 3D image and flattens it out onto a sheet of paper, and you can cut out each individual piece to put them together to make the three-dimensional pieces. So you can see this is one single piece glued to all these others. Now to size it, the first time I made it, I made it a little too small. I thought the sizing was correct. So this is actually the very first one that I made. You can see this is the exact piece there, same size. What I did to scale it up before really thinking it through, I taped this old piece, or the original size of the shoulder, which is just one of these half pieces, to just a big sheet of paper and traced out about how much I thought I needed to make it the right size for my arm. And so that ended up being about this size, as you can see there. The other pieces, I just kind of had to wing it, like this piece that goes all the way around. It was really easy to just trace on. I just traced this again onto another sheet of paper, and then using that outline, I just traced a small, about the same half centimeter, just a line all the way around to create this little design piece. So I had to do that for a lot of these. Like these ones, I just went through and I just kind of wing it on the design. I drew a piece up in my, just looking off reference pictures. I thought, okay, that looks pretty close. Drew it on paper, cut it out, held it up to the piece, and I thought, okay, yeah, that does look like the right size. Then went out and cut it through foam. And we'll get to that later. But first is getting the pattern ready. And once I got the pattern ready, I did just start cutting them all out. So you lay it on foam, cut it out. And this is where you have to decide what thicknesses of foam that you want to use. Now, as you can see, a lot of this is pretty thick, and I think that this is 10 millimeter foam. This works really well for the Spartan armor because it just makes it look more bulky. And on top of that 10 millimeter foam is how you can use the 2 millimeter or just inset it. So this piece here, you can see this is a 10 millimeter piece and this is a 10 millimeter piece, but I cut this bottom one out and just moved it down about a half a centimeter and glued it back on like that to give it that step. So if I were making this again in the future, I would use this cheap cardboard calipers I made, and I would measure the size of my arm at least in a straight line. So the top of my bicep to the back of my tricep, and I would go on the program. So let's say I would hold that up right there, and then I would measure that distance. And the program works all in millimeters, or all in metric. So I'd measure that is 0 to about 12, so about 120 millimeters. And I would go in the program and measure from the most inside spot, being about right there, probably, on the program. And it would measure a straight line to this side. And I would just make sure that is about 120, maybe a little smaller because this is spherical, or it is a round shape. So I would make it a teeny bit smaller just to make sure it fits snugly on my arm. And if it comes out a little too small in the end, you can always just add a little bit in those seams just to give it a little enough space to make it fit. Now for generally building it, after I got out all the pieces all cut out individually, I started with this inside bicep piece and I did the shoulder part after. So I made this whole round piece here. And it's really easy because both sides are symmetrical. So once you got one side down, you kind of know it in your head and you can just do it quicker on the other side. And a lot of these detail pieces, it's like that is 2mm foam and this is 2mm foam. And this little piece down here is 2mm foam. Those are all, the rest is all 10mm foam. For gluing it together, when I made this, I used a lot of super glue. I have now switched to contact cement, and I much prefer contact cement over super glue. And I just use this DAP Weldwood contact cement. Really easy to use. You put it on each side that you want to glue together, let it dry till it's tacky, and then you stick them together, and it works wonders. Now, for making this shoulder piece, I made it separately by itself, as you can see, and then I attached it to the bicep, this bicep piece afterward. For this piece, like I said, this is the smaller one, so I had to resize it myself. And again, I would try and use the calipers to find a better size relative to the bicep piece, so it doesn't look like it's off. But for this one, I had to wing it on a lot of these pieces. These ones were all in the design, but these ones I had to just kind of make up a piece looking off reference, like I said before. And I had drawn it out, and I said, okay, that looks about correct. Cut it out of 2mm foam, and you can see there's a 2mm foam layers just on top of each other to make it 4mm to give it a little more depth. This one, again, 2mm on top of 2mm to give it that extra depth. And I just line it up, all looking at the reference images I could find online. Now, after scaling it up, that changed the dimensions, or the spacing on some of them. And I actually decided, you know, I thought that space looked fine, but I had to elongate this piece, so this piece in the pattern, I just had to make it longer. Now, to get the shape of it in kind of that curved shape, I used my heat gun a lot. And what I did is I would heat up a piece with the heat gun, and I would just bend it and kind of hold it, and after it was heated, it would help keep that shape a little bit more. And this is just a scrap piece, so don't worry about that. But that's what I did for this big piece, the under piece. All the 10mm foam pieces, actually, I used mostly heat to just shape them. Now you can see some like straight bends in it. The way I did that, and it's kind of difficult to see, but if you see that line right there, what I did is I cut a V groove and then took out that extra foam and glued those seams together, which gives it, without cutting it on this side, it gives it that harder little bit of an angle. Now, once I had the general construction of it done, I did have to kind of make up these 3 support pieces to glue it onto the bicep piece. And these ones, there is nothing in the patterns, so I literally just held it up to each other and kind of held it. So if I was doing it on this side, I kind of held it to where I thought it needed to be angled out and away from the bicep piece. And I just kind of looked at it and pictured it, really just pictured it in my head, and cut out a scrap piece of foam and held that scrap piece of foam up in there. So if I was just holding one, I would hold one piece up and go, okay, that does look about correct. Then I would try and cut another piece of foam exactly like that to just mirror on the other side. Same thing for this little piece here. And this back piece, I just didn't want anyone to see all the extra glue and junk in here. So what I did is, again, I just used a scrap piece and held it up, saw where I needed to kind of cut out the piece on the foam, and just glued it in, just to cover up that area. Now, after I got it constructed and glued together, both pieces together, I used 3 coats of Plasti Dip just to seal everything in. And if you want to, before you do the Plasti Dip, you can run your heat gun over it just to really close up all the pores, and that helps it get really smooth. Once all the Plasti Dip dried, then I just went over with that green paint, and it was the Italian olive color by Krylon, which I think is the perfect color for Master Chief's costume. I just sprayed everything in that green and let that dry. I did 2 or 3 coats of that, and just till I thought it looked covered well enough. Then all these other places, I used black paint and just painted them in with a little brush. So I used mostly a smallish brush about this size, filled it all in, all the pieces just looking off of reference photos of what I thought looked like it was colored black, or at least darker green, and I thought this black would look pretty good. Now before I used just a general acrylic paint, now I use this Plaid FX paint, a smooth satin because I don't want it to be glossy. They have interesting names for all of their colors, so this one, black, is just called Carbon, but I would use Carbon, black Carbon, and just paint all the colors black, or all the areas black that I think need to be black. Now for the silver on here, to get that kind of weathered, scratched look, I just use this Deco Art metallics, just bright metallic paint. It actually works really well. It gives a good shimmer. And I used a dry brush method for this one. So I took about 1.5 inch brush, dip a little bit in the paint, and then I kind of wipe the paint off if there's too much on just a paper towel. And then you just lightly go over the edges and just stick to the edges. You don't want to get up too much on like these smooth surfaces because it ends up just looking like too much silver. But all these edges where stuff would like catch and rake along it, or wherever you think it would on the armor, like if she fell down a hill or, you know, got in a fight. That's just all I did for all this silver. And I added a little bit more in some places, as you can see, just to give it a little varying difference, because you don't want it all to look so similar, then it looks fake. Now, after I did all the painting, I attached these straps. And the way I did that is I used hot glue on this one, but what I would do is I would put some of the contact cement on each side and glue it with contact cement first, just on that inch that it's connected to. And I did it on the outside most part of the bicep, so it'll be on the outside of the shoulder. And then I went over it with hot glue just to really seal it in there. And I did that on both sides, and I used a parachute clip. So I used the female side on this side, and I have the male end on the other side. So that all you do is when you put it on, it goes on over your shoulder. And sometimes you might need to get someone to help with this part. But this will clip into the other side, and it just sits resting on my shoulders. That way it doesn't fall down. If I didn't have this, it would constantly fall down. And you have to hike it back up throughout the day as you're using it. So this strap, and this is elastic, just 1 inch thick elastic. So you can tighten it and it'll feel tight, and it will also stretch when you move your arm. It won't be like restrictive at all. So that was a quick, and I say really quick, overview of how I made this. I hope you guys found it useful. I really hope it helps. Please let me know what you think. If it really wasn't that helpful, please let me know. Please let in the comments, and I will do my best to either have other videos on how-tos, maybe remake the armor. I just didn't want to go through and remake the whole armor set again, so I figured this way I can at least tell you guys a little bit about how I did it. This is a little bit more of a simpler piece, so maybe if you want to see something else, let me know that in the comments. But that is generally how I made the whole set of armor. And like I said, I will link all the files that I used. I will link that in the description below. So go ahead and use those. Let me know what you think. If you like the video, please like, subscribe. Helps out the channel. And yeah, hail to the hobbies.